All right, so thank you for that introduction. So as you said, I'm Rachel Taggart-Ryan, and I'm now actually the Senior Campaigns Officer. I recently got promoted here at Humanists UK. That means that I am one of a team of 7 full-time lobbyists employed by the charity to campaign for policy changes that we want to see, both at the local and also the national level. So my role at Humanists UK is to campaign on all our human rights and equality issues. That can be anything from our freedom of expression, so I'm working on repealing the blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland, to saving the Human Rights Act, and I also work on our public ethical issues, and that goes across a very broad range of spectrum. Pretty much everything that isn't assisted dying that we do, whether that's abortion, working on FGM, organ donation, something we've been very successful in the last few years. Anything that comes under a kind of broad issue to do with a different position on ethics comes to me within our team. And one thing that I do, and I'm actually training up another team member to take over this work from me, is I manage all our asylum support service, so helping those fleeing persecution abroad because they are humanists and helping them to get their cases in front of the Home Office and to be granted asylum in the UK. So in this talk, I'm going to give you an overview of what Public Affairs and Policy team does. This is going to break down into 2 main parts. So firstly, I'm going to discuss the issues that we focus on and how this is recently changed under our new strategy. And secondly, I'd like to give you a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of how we campaign and what kinds of activities we actually get up to on our day-to-day basis. So as you're all members of a humanist branch, I'm going to assume that you have a working knowledge of our community services. So that's our work on ceremonies, our weddings, funerals, baby namings, our work on pastoral supports. So that's our chaplains, non-religious chaplains in prisons and hospitals, and hopefully very soon we're going to have some chaplains in the armed forces. Education, our schools network and our learning resources, and also Faith to Faithless, which is our apostate support network. But what you may be less familiar with is the work of the public affairs and policy teams and the types of campaigns that we work on. So broadly speaking, public affairs is about engaging with politicians and other decision makers in order to explain our organisational policies and the views of our views on public policy issues, assisting policymakers and legislators in amending or laying down better policy and legislation. In essence, what that really means is it is our job to get politicians to do things, or sometimes persuade them not to do things. Until recently, we campaigned across 4 main policy areas, so education, human rights and equality, secularism, and public ethical issues. I've put these up here on the slide with an example of some of the campaigns that fall under each. So you can see, I'm sure you're very familiar with that under education, our biggest campaign is to end faith school admissions, to have humanism included on national curricula for religious education. And actually recently one of our big successes in the last few weeks has been on illegal schools. So these are unregistered educational establishments that actually teach quite extreme religious curriculums, whether they be madrasas or yeshivas typically. And we've actually now got legislation which had its second reading, a government bill, second reading yesterday, which is going to give greater powers to Ofsted to close down these kind of establishments. And that's something that's come off the back of our campaigning on this in the last 5 or 6 years. Human rights and equality, very broad range of issues that come under this, and the most of that sits with me that I work on, from freedom of expression, protecting trying to repeal blasphemy laws, protecting our current Human Rights Act settlement, and things much like banning gay conversion therapy, which is a campaign that we're looking to do fruitful in the next year, I think, and getting legislation on the books. Secularism, these are probably no surprise to anybody here: disestablishment of the Church of England and getting rid of the 26 bishops in the House of Lords, are the top kind of campaigns you would expect of an organisation campaigning for a secular state. You might see at the bottom there, we've also got remembrance ceremonies. Now, this is something that we've actually also been very successful on. And for the last 3 years, we've now had a representative at the Cenotaph, the National Memorial Ceremony in Whitehall. Public ethical issues are big. Our biggest two here is assisted dying. This actually sits with one of my colleagues. We've got some very good news coming through actually in Jersey and the Isle of Man are both now progressing assisted dying bills, which will be the first part of the UK to do so. The UK and Crown dependencies, and is going to change, I think, the landscape that we're operating in. Abortion rights, this is what I lead on. We've been very successful in terms of decriminalisation in Northern Ireland. Big victory recently in terms of getting telemedicine abortion made a permanent feature of abortion legislation. So that's allowing women to be able to choose to take the abortion pills for early termination at home. And of course, organ donation, we now have opt-out organ donation across the UK, so that's been a success. There are a few other things that we do, such as provide support for non-religious asylum seekers, as I mentioned, and we campaign internationally against blasphemy laws. They don't really fall under these headings, but it's sort of another part of our work that's more ad hoc. However, as you can imagine, this is a lot of policies to cover. Most other charities, campaign staff work on a maximum of only 1 or 2 issues. So recently we've brought in a new strategy with a sharper focus on our priority campaigns. This doesn't mean that we're going to not work on all of the other issues, all about 21 different areas that we were working on, but we are going to proactively now focus on achieving sort of 6 goals within the next 5 years. So our new strategy is really going to be focusing on our first one, which is legal recognition of humanist marriage in England and Wales. As you may be aware, you can have a legal humanist marriage in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and both have increased hugely in popularity there since legal recognition was granted, but you cannot do the same in England and Wales. And we're hoping that the Law Commission is going to make a recommendation very soon in the next few months, and that this will put pressure on government to make a very simple change, which will simply allow humanists to have a wedding ceremony that's reflective of their own belief system. Our second priority, this is our education area. We're looking to increase the percentage of public that are opposed to religious discrimination in school admissions, and also reduce the number of students who are subject to religious selection in going to state schools. You may be aware that currently only the UK and Iran are the only 2 countries that have state schools, Ireland as well actually, that operate in this way, and you are allowed to discriminate against children based on the religion of their parents. 3 is obviously we're increasing the number of schools where balanced teaching is required. This is about religious education and ensuring that more children receive not just instructional religious education, but that which allows them to be able to freely develop their critical abilities, as well as being inclusive of the non-religious beliefs. International work is really what we're focusing on in our 4th criteria. So this is the FCDO, that's the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And this is really working with the Foreign Office to support persecuted humanists. And we're working very much at the moment on the Mubarak Bala case, which I don't know if you're aware of, but the president of the Nigerian humanists was recently sentenced to 24 years in prison over a Facebook post in which he declared himself to be a humanist, which was deemed to contravene the country's blasphemy law. So that's part of the work that we do advocating for persecuted humanists. Number 5 is legalised assisted dying, and that's both for terminally ill and incurably suffering in England and Wales. I'm sure many of you are quite aware of this issue and probably followed our work very closely. And finally, 6 is the abolition of Northern Ireland's blasphemy laws. Now, this is the campaign of these 6 that I lead on. Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK to still have a blasphemy law. We are very, very close to achieving a repeal. We have a majority of members of the Legislative Assembly, that's the members of Stormont, in support of a bill which we would like to bring forward. I simply need the Assembly to reform and a Northern Irish government to come to form back into power. If they can agree with each other for 2 minutes, and we can repeal this law. So in each of these campaigns, there are a number of actions that our members and supporters can do to further our cause. And I'll talk a little bit more about grassroots campaigning and what members of branches can do to help us with these campaigns. So I tend to think of our work as breaking down into the following 6 areas. So public affairs is our work trying to persuade decision makers, mostly politicians, to take or sometimes not to take certain actions. Policy is about building up the case and refining the positions we take on our issues. Campaigning is the process by which you will affect change, and part of this can be through working with the media to highlight your cause, and sometimes it means taking challenges and litigation through the courts. So I'll come a bit more on to speaking about examples where we've done both media and legal work. And the final part is helping people. So as a charity, people come to us from advice when they think they have experienced discrimination and they need our expertise to resolve a problem. Now, one of the biggest areas that I work on in terms of helping people is, of course, our asylum support service. And I have, in the last 4 years now, supported 70 people who are going through the asylum system because they're persecuted because they are non-religious. But also we often give help to people who are experiencing discrimination at work or prejudice in a public office. So there's lots of ways in which we provide expertise and advice. Right, I'm now going to run through and try to give you some insight into the kind of activities that fall within each of these areas, kind of compose what public affairs and policy work is. So starting with our public affair work, you can break this down into 3, namely lobbying ministers and civil servants, working with parliamentarians, and I'll come on to the AllParty Parliamentary Humanist group, and also taking part in civil society collaborations. So that's working with other organisations who have similar objectives. So we meet regularly with civil servants on areas of interest to us, whether this be on faith schools, religious education, relationships and sex education teams in the Department of Education, the Human Rights and Democracy Department at the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, visas and immigration at the Home Office, and quite often also the Religion and Belief team at the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. And recently, actually, we've been meeting, or having quite a few meetings, as you can imagine, because we're progressing legislation on this. We work with the Illegal Schools team at Ofsted. So in total, our work intersects with over a dozen other government departments and a number more of non-departmental public bodies. So we have a lot of plates to spin, and some quite complex stakeholder management is involved. We also meet fairly regularly with ministers. So, for example, we met with Sajid Javid when he was the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Lord Agnew when he was Schools Minister, and we also frequently have meetings with the Labour and Liberal Democrat front benches. So, for example, we recently met with David Lammy from Labour on the Human Rights Act reform, something that he's going to be leading the opposition charge against. And we've also met several times with Naomi Long, who, until the recent election, she was the Northern Ireland Justice Minister, and gaining her support for repealing the country's blasphemy laws was really the linchpin in moving that campaign forward. So the AllParty Parliamentary Humanist group, a lot of our political lobbying is done in close partnership with the APPHG, as we call it, which is a grouping of about 115 MPs and peers from all parties, humanists who are willing, as Stephen Fry always puts it, to nail their colours to the mast and take up our causes in Parliament. So we actually had our AGM of today. So slightly before I joined this meeting, I was attending a meeting of the AllParty Parliamentary Humanist Group. Our previous chair was Crispin Blunt, who was our first Conservative chair, who you can see up in the top right here. Today, the co-chair is also Baroness Burt, who some of you might be familiar with. Baroness Joan Bakewell, who some of you might be familiar with, was quite a famous broadcaster on the BBC. Our new chair as of today is Tommy Shepherd, who is quite a leading SNP MP, so one of the Scottish nationalists. But we also have some very high-profile members. So Jess Phillips is quite a leading figure on the backbenches in Labour. One of the leading experts on women and domestic violence. We have Lord Dubs up the top in the middle here, probably one of my favourite members of the House of Lords. Became quite infamous a few years ago with his Dubs Amendment, which allowed over 3,000 unaccompanied child refugees to come to the UK. And of course, also we have very prominent members such as Keir Starmer, who is now obviously the leader of the Labour Party. So often our most effective work is done through our parliamentarians in this group. That may mean asking questions or written or oral questions, getting them to write to ministers, tabling amendments to government bills, and to help facilitate meetings with ministers. We managed to get humanist marriage in England and Wales onto the statute books, although it's never been brought into force, thanks to Molly Meacher here and the private members bill that she brought forward. So last month, actually, we managed to have a debate in Parliament, a backbench members debate on humanist marriages in England and Wales, which was facilitated by the AllParty Parliamentary Group. Now, a few years back, we once wrote 70 parliamentary questions on the same topic, and we got our members in Parliament to kind of bombard the government into submission over their new policy on faith school admissions. So they wanted to allow new academies that have a religious character to be able to select 100% of their pupils by religion. And previously, they'd only been allowed to do 50%, and they had to keep 50% open to all students, regardless of religion or belief. And we were able to maintain that 50% limit because we just bombarded the government with so much opposition through our parliamentarians that they actually folded on this. So it can be a very effective means of enacting change. Working with civil society. So the third part, a key part of any charity's work, is developing strong links with other third sector organisations, particularly those with shared interests in our policy areas. This is especially important for Humanists UK for two reasons. Firstly, because there are already 7 of us in the public affairs and policy team, and we have, up until recently, we're working across 23 different campaigns. The more we can get other organisations to do some of the heavy lifting for us, all the better. And second, because this might be a surprise to some of you, we are still considered to be quite controversial. The more we can get other voices to speak up on our behalf, voices that are seen as less partisan, less divisive, less, religiously divisive, which we can still be seen, the more impact we are likely to have. So just going to give you a few examples here. I sit on the steering group of Voice for Choice, which brings together organisations campaigning for women's reproductive rights. Richie, my director, sits on the board of the Religious Education Council for England and Wales, and we also co-founded the Accord Coalition for Inclusive Education, which has been very successful in campaigning against new schools being allowed to increase the number of pupils they subject to religious selection. And also we sit on the Sex Education Forum, which has been very successful And I'm going to use that as a bit of an example to show how we work with other organisations. So I want to quickly expand on this last one to demonstrate the impact that working in coalition with other charities can have. You may have seen a few years ago that we achieved one of our key education policy aims when relationships and sex education was made compulsory in all schools. Well, that was the result of a tremendous collaborative effort behind the scenes, led in part, well, in large part actually, by Humanists UK. We used our links to other charities to bring together organisations like the Sex Education Forum, PHSE Association, Terence Higgins Trust and Barnardo's into a core group which coordinated the campaign for change. Later, other organisations were brought on board like the NSPCC, Girl Guiding and the End Violence Against Women Coalition and Stonewall. We at Humanists UK hosted meetings, we drafted joint letters to the Education Secretary, we met with the government's RSE team, and we conducted a majority vote to demonstrate that we were so close to having a majority of MPs on our side. So when this legislation, which we've been pushing for, hit the ground, we knew we could get it passed. So we were instrumental, in other words, in convincing the government that it was possible to legislate for compulsory relationships and sex education. And the government and the consensus that was formed by the third sector made ministers resilient to the opposition that came from, well, they were very resistant to the opposition that came from the religious right, who were pushing very much against any form of relationships and sex education being taught in schools. Without this coalition, I very seriously doubt that we would have achieved this aim of having this on the statutory curriculum. So the other thing we do is original research. Being good humanists, we're always at pains to base everything we do on the evidence. And that doesn't mean just referring to other people's research, but also conducting our own. And I have sort of 3 examples here recently. So our first piece of research that we put out, just before COVID actually, so it'll be 2019, was any lawful impediment. This was really a research into how we could overcome issues brought up in the legalization process for humanist marriage. So basically it was research looking at how we could overcome all of the opposition that the government had put in our way. And it was quite a unique piece of research. No one had ever looked in depth at the legal implications of humanist marriage in such a way. And it's a fantastic resource. And if any of you are thinking of writing to your MP or being involved or having a humanist marriage yourself, I would definitely say this is definitely the resource to look up before you do that. In the middle here, this was a quite unique piece of research that we did that was looking at the impact of religious selection in schools upon other factors, so socioeconomic and ethnic origin selection. So we wanted to see what effect it has. So if you start selecting pupils by religion, you are also ipso facto, you're going to be having socioeconomic and also racial selection as well. And we did some interesting research that showed that this is the effect that religious selection has. And finally, we did some interesting research quite recently into the effect of religious privilege in Parliament. And we were able to demonstrate that non-religious and non-Christian MPs and peers are actually disadvantaged in speaking rights in Parliament. So as a result of prayers and a result of conventions around bishops, democracy is actually affected in the fact that those who do not attend prayers, and in the House of Lords Convention that bishops speak first before anybody else. If a bishop wishes to speak, all other lords have to sit down. That has actually had an impact on the rights of those from other groups to be represented, to be able to ask questions and to be able to speak in Parliament. So that was a unique piece of research that no one had looked into before, but it actually does have an impact on democratic representation. It's not a benign tradition, I think many defending such institutions believe it to be. So moving on, consultations. there are two types of consultations, those that the government plans to take notice of and those that it doesn't. The impact that we can have in responding to consultations can therefore vary enormously. So in my role, I draft a huge number of consultation responses. Recently, I completed a 16,000-word epic on the Human Rights Act reform. Will it have an impact on changing the government's course of action? I hope so, but I cannot have with any certainty that it will do. But on the other hand, it is partly through responding to consultations that we have secured some of our key successes, such as getting evolution on the primary national curriculum, and opt-out organ donation was an area where actually responses from the public and from institutions such as Humanists UK did actually have a big impact on how the legislation was put forward. And even when setting out the evidence to the government may not lead to immediate change, it may have an impact down the line. It's very much an accumulative way of enacting change. So something we are doing much more of, and very much linked to consultations, is campaigning with our members and supporters. We often ask our members to write to their MP and ask them to take up ask their MPs to take up an issue in Parliament. This is one of the most effective means of getting humanist issues in front of hard-to-reach MPs, who would otherwise not be able, we would not be able as professional lobbyists to create a relationship with. Recently, I helped organise a member to go visit Boris Johnson on humanist marriages, as he was a constituency MP and his constituency MP, and I think that was really the only opportunity that we would have had to be able to get humanist marriage in front of the Prime Minister for 30 minutes, you know, someone who we otherwise would not have been able to develop a relationship with. I'll give you a little example of this. When I first was scoping out how to campaign to repeal the blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland, no other organisation was campaigning on this, and it wasn't an issue that was across the Stormont's agenda. So I thought, the first thing I'll do is I'll write to all the MLAs. There's 90 of them, and I'll just ask them, would you be in favour of repealing this? I got one reply, which was from a member who was a young Earth creationist, who simply said, no, I'm not in favour of what you want to do. So having said, this was obviously demonstrating that what we need is to get our members and supporters in Northern Ireland Humanists active. And I went out and I said to our members and supporters in Northern Ireland, can you write yourselves to your members of the legislative, to your MLAs? And as a result of that, within months, we had a majority of responses from, so more than 45 out of the 90 that we knew. And we'd also managed to establish that every party except the DUP would be in favour of change. So MPs, MPs, MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly really are responsive to people writing to them, what their constituents feels, the balance of any opinion that comes out of their email inbox. So this is one of the reasons that we're so keen to get members in front of their MPs, whether that be writing or visiting in person. I've also often encouraged our members to respond to consultations and add weight of numbers to the positions we take. We've also recently become more focused, as you can see here, on direct action as a campaigning tool. And you can see here Humanists UK members at recent demonstrations. So the first one on the left is in favour of assisted dying bill that was having its second reading. We were outside Westminster. And the second was from a couple of months ago, and this is members of LGBT humanists at a protest outside Downing Street on banning conversion therapy. And there were about 3,000 people that came to that demonstration. And we were all given a platform to speak. It's also very important to work with our members and supporters when dealing with local issues. So to demonstrate grassroots support, there can be no better example than the couple that we worked with in Northern Ireland to gain legal recognition for humanist marriage. So a couple of our members wished to have a humanist marriage, which wasn't legally recognised at the time, and we worked with them to be able to bring a legal challenge in front of the High Court, which was ultimately successful. So that's another way in which we can work with our members in terms of getting legal action initiated. In our team, we're also responsible for all of Humanists UK's external media work. We take a range of approaches to the work here, but the most important thing is building up strong relations with journalists of all political stripes. In the past, we've secured front page coverage on every national newspaper, as well as we get repeated coverage in BBC News, ITV News, Sky News, the Today programme, the Sunday programme, and also Newsnight is particularly important to us. So in the run-up to the hearing for the Northern Ireland Humanist marriage case that I've just mentioned, we secured blanket coverage in 3 jurisdictions, which was a first. So in the UK, we had BBC News, ITV, The Guardian, Times, Sun, Daily Star, Metro, and we also managed to get an entire feature in The Telegraph. In Northern Ireland, we basically got all of the broadsheets, so Irish Times, Belfast Telegraph, Newsletter and The Mirror. And also in the Republic of Ireland, we did likewise with the Irish Times, the Irish Independent and the Examiner, and we managed to get a broadcast package on RTE. Other examples include, and I think you can see down at the bottom here, are Andrew Copson, our Chief Executive. This was on BBC News night. We got to secure a whole segment on the problem of illegal schools in the Haredi communities in Stamford Hill. And that was part of what built up actually quite a strong campaign and a lot of media outrage, which has ultimately led to the change that we're now seeing. So you also see a few of our other members. So Richie, my director, this is him outside the High Court on humanist marriage. Dr. Ruth Wareham is now Professor Ruth Wareham. This is her on Jeremy Vine talking about compulsory worship in schools. And of course, Alice Roberts, a broadcaster of great esteem and our outgoing president. She secured much coverage during her 3 years at Humanists UK on a whole range of educational and public ethical issues. So another growing area of our work is taking legal cases. In recent years, we've also taken the government to court over the exclusion of humanists from the GCSE religious curriculum, which we won. We took the case in Northern Ireland on humanist marriages, which we won. We also have intervened in every assisted dying and abortion case, including cases at the Supreme Court in 2014, 16, 17 and 18. All of the claimants in the previous and current assisted dying cases have been members of Humanists UK, and we've also been involved with our members in legal cases on collective worship in schools, humanists on sacrays, and also we quite frequently have taken legal action over discrimination in the employment of pastoral carers in the NHS. So you can see here on the left, this is Laura Lacole and Noonan O'Kane, who took the Northern Ireland marriage case. And also on the right here, this is Paul Lamb, who was a leading figure in court challenges on assisted dying and was a major inspirational figure in that cause. He sadly passed away last year. Finally, we do our best to help anyone who gets in touch with us who may be a subject of discrimination or unfair treatment in an area related to our work. Sometimes, as we've heard, this might provoke us to take individuals' legal action cases, or we may take up a particular issue with an MP or government department. And sometimes it simply involves advising people about the law, their rights, and what means to redress that they might have. I'm going to come on to my last sort of thing I want to really talk to you about, which is local activists. We have 2 campaigns that we would like our local activists to focus on. We have many take actions and many things that you can be involved in, on a very reactive basis, but there's 2 areas where we'd like our members to kind of be proactively involved. And this is legal recognition of humanist marriages and opposing the opening of new voluntary aided faith schools. So we've produced a guide on visiting your MP on the 1st, which includes briefings you can print out and give to your MP. If you are interested in getting involved in our education campaigns, so that's on faith schools, please do get in contact with Robert Can, who is our education campaigns manager, and he has a lot of resources that he can give you, and we can target new schools that we know are opening in specific areas. So that's really what I want to say. I'll just point out that the link at the bottom here, and I will happily share these slides with you. If you go to our Take Action, these are all the areas, all our petitions, all of our Write to Your MPs, anything that you can do to be active in our campaigns, you can find the link and more information there. So that's everything I want to say, so I'll happily open it up to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Rachel. That was great. You're a very busy person.
So, anybody want to open up the floor to a comment or question or observation about our campaign work? John, I see you've unmuted.
Oh, have I? Yes, sorry. Where does the main opposition to humanist marriage come from? Is it all religious denominations, or are there some more less vociferous than others?
That is an interesting question, and it's not what you would expect. So there is very little opposition from other religious groups to humanist marriage. The Church of England has put out a statement to say that it is not opposed to humanist marriage. And that's understandable in many ways, because this is an issue about humanists for humanists that doesn't affect how other people wish to get married. We think the biggest opposition is actually civil registrars, who would see this as a business competitor. And they have also been pushing very hard to have essentially outdoor legal civil marriages, which are not previously allowed. So if you're having a civil registrar marriage, they have to take place inside and in registered buildings, which are mostly registry offices, but you can also have certain buildings like country manors who have temporary licenses to conduct weddings. So I think the biggest opposition there is the idea that this would have a competitor in the marriage market, and we would be able to offer services that civil registrars can't at the moment, although in the future probably could offer. So it's one of the most frustrating campaigns, because the case for it has been made in Scotland, where they had recognition nearly 20 years ago, and humanist marriages are now the most popular type of belief marriage in Scotland. So there are more humanist marriages than there are Church of Scotland marriages or Catholic marriages. So that's the main opposition. Now we are in a position of waiting for the Law Commission to produce its big report on reform of marriage law in general. And the government is refusing to be pushed on making a decision until after the Law Commission has published this. This is frustrating in many ways, because we've had two previous Law Commissions recommend, back in 2014 and in 2016, that there's no opposition to humanist marriage, that there's no legitimate reason why this couldn't happen in law. But unfortunately, the government has been pushing it into the long grass for a very long time, and this report is due. It was due last year. It's now unlikely to come before the autumn, so it's something that we're continually getting pushed into the long grass on. But we have now brought in, we have a full-time member of staff, campaigner, just focusing on humanist marriage.
Thank you. That was interesting. So it's a financial opposition, really.
I think it's a business interest.
Yeah.
The other religion and belief groups don't have a huge amount of opposition to this.
Oh, that's most interesting. Thank you.
I just wondered what humanists are doing about opposing halal meat. I saw that you got that down there, one of the things.
So this is an area that I worked on reasonably proactively in the last few years. It's not going to be taken forward as one of our campaign areas that we're prioritising. So the situation at the moment is that all meat products in the UK, all slaughtering has to be provided with either a mechanical or electrical stun prior to the lethal incision being made. Except there are exemptions for Jews and Muslims to be able to not use a stun on the animal prior in accordance with their religious rites. Now, this has been established for quite some time, and it's interesting because about 80% of all halal meat is stunned anyway. It's the position on stunning is not universal within the Muslim community, and the vast majority believe that as long as the blessing is said, then that constitutes halal meat. There's about 20%, which is a very strong vocal minority, who are pushing that halal meat cannot be pre-stunned. But the vast majority of halal meat that you will actually see in the shops is stunned anyway. All kosher meat is non-stunned. Within the Jewish community, the rules are much clearer, that a stunning of any type is not accepted. So if you're seeing something which is kosher or shalita, then it will be unstunned. One of the things that we've really been working for and pushing is getting a labelling system so that people would be able to clearly identify meat, whether it's been stunned or not, because there's no requirement to have any labelling to show that at all. I mean, often kosher meat enters the general meat market because only certain parts of the animal can be used, and people are none the wiser. There's been several attempts under bills to bring amendments to that effect. However, they've not been successful, and I'm not aware at the moment that they are likely to re-emerge in this next Parliament. So this has been an issue that's been driven forward by many organisations, including the RSPCA, the British Veterinary Association, and the British Slaughter Association. I think there's not an immediate prospect of change soon, but it's something that we work very closely with other charities on. And it might be that another private member's bill or an amendment to animal sentience or animal welfare bill is possible. But I don't think there's a bill immediately that I'm aware of that would be a vehicle for that change.
What's the nature of the opposition?
On ritual slaughter, that would be from the Muslim and Jewish communities, and it is a strong opposition. And they would generally consider that there is poor motivation in many of the groups that are campaigning for this. And there has been a history to do with anti-Semitism and to do with Islamophobia within the groups pushing for this change. And they are also resistant to labelling because they believe that labelling would stigmatise their communities and stigmatise the use.
Labelling would make everybody aware, other people aware, when they go to Tesco's. Yeah, so it's the labelling ought to be first, you know. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, there is very strong opposition to that. There has been attempts. I mean, there's a member of the Humanist group, Kerry McCarthy, who is a sort of leading figure in the House of Commons on animal welfare and animal sentience, who I know has been doing some very interesting work on this. We also have a member called Lord Trees, in the House of Lords, and he was previously the president of the British Veterinary Association, and he has put forward many debates on labelling of halal meat. I think it's not going to be one of our priority areas going forward. It's something we will work more reactively on rather than proactively.
You said the Human Rights Act is being revamped in this country. And I think the Conservatives have prided themselves on the UK being having high animal welfare standards. Do you think things will improve or go backwards? Because this is obviously one of them.
There was a lot of attempts, and the Animal Sentience Bill, which sort of rode for a while and fell recently before the Queen's speech. A lot of that was to ensure that the standards of animal welfare that were in legislation in Europe as part of our membership of the European Union would be carried over and transposed, and we wouldn't lose any standards. Now there's no guarantee that that is going to be the case. So as a result of Brexit, the door is open essentially for standards to be removed. The government for a long time said, because we were part of a broader European Union labelling standards, that it wasn't possible to bring in Pacific method of slaughter labelling because we were part of a broader labelling system across Europe. But that wasn't actually the case. That was very much an excuse because what the European law does is to have minimum base standards. You can exceed those standards, and if we wanted to bring in method of slaughter labelling, we could do so within that framework. So what really is happening at the moment, it's not to do with the Human Rights Act, because you're very much aware the Human Rights Act is very separate and has nothing to do with our membership of the European Union. But a lot of the regulation around animal standards is now open for deterioration over time or deliberate repeal and lowering of standards. So that is a concern going forward, and I think a lot of the opportunities to enact change, to put amendments as riders into bills, are going to be coming forward from Parliament, who are looking to preserve those standards that we are in danger of losing. I'm going to take a question from Azil, who we've not met in person, but we have corresponded. And the question is, how can we as individuals best contribute to humanist campaigning? There's lots of ways in which we can be involved in humanist campaigns. So we are quite frequently sending out to our members and supporters, please write to your MP about this, please sign this petition, can you respond to this government consultation and put your view ahead. So we will be frequently emailing out to our members things such as that. There's also, and I'll give the link the link is in the slide, to where we have all of our sort of standing take actions. So when we do something with our members and supporters, we call it a take action. Specifically, we will have demonstrations and campaigns and protests coming up, and we will make our members aware of that. I did recently get in touch with all of the people who I'm helping with asylum, to get them to come to a protest in London that we were doing about Mubarak Bala. So 3 weeks ago we held a protest outside of the Nigerian High Commission, and I was quite keen to get all of our asylum seekers to come to that, and about half a dozen of them did, so that was great. I think in your position, and I don't know if everyone's aware, but you're one of the asylum seekers that we're helping. We're going to be doing quite a lot of research at the moment. So I recently secured funding at the University of Sheffield to take forward a PhD, pay for a PhD student to research the particular barriers that are faced by non-religious people in the asylum system in the UK. And we're going to be looking to our cohort of people that we've helped really to share their experiences and contribute to that research. So this is going to be original research into an area of asylum law that's not been written about or researched before. So that is something that's coming up as well. But mostly it's one of the easiest things that you can do, and one of the things that actually makes a big difference is writing to your MP about things. So whether it's humanist marriage, whether it's reform of the Human Rights Act, bothering your MP and saying, this is what I feel about something, it really does have a huge impact on the people who actually do make decisions. And whether your MP is a backbencher or not, what sways them is the balance of opinion they receive in their inboxes. A good example of this was about a month ago. We were successful in getting an amendment to the Health and Social Care Bill that went through the House of Lords. Baroness Sugg got an amendment put into the bill about allowing women to continue to have telemedicine abortion procedures. So that's being able to take the 2 pills required to have an early termination at home rather than in the clinic. So this bill then goes back to the House of Commons. Now, in the debates that went on this amendment, all of the MPs were saying, well, of the people that have spoken to me about this, the balance of opinion is in favour of this, and what they are talking about and what they're using to influence their judgment on something which they might not have a huge amount of knowledge about, they're not experts in abortion law, is, you know, X number of people in my inbox say this is a good idea, X number of people are opposed, and they're looking at that weight of balance. And one of the things that the other side is always very good at doing is getting a huge number of people to just say no. If you can get 3,000 people to write to their MP saying you must oppose this, it's going to have an impact. And what our side does, we don't have that weight in numbers. We don't have the American money that comes to fund anti-abortion work in this UK. So we're always at a disadvantage. But what we do need is getting people to put their representations in front of their MP. One of the things that, I mean, it's been an interesting story. So the MP for Walthamstow said this to me, and I think it's quite useful in understanding this. She said, being an MP is like always being about to sit an A-level exam on a subject that you've never studied for. So at any given time, you could be asked to be able to appear in media, to respond to a constituent. You're going to be asked to have an opinion on any subject and policy that might come up. It might be abortion, it might be dangerous dogs, it could be primary school education. You are expected to have, at any given time, to be able to vote and have an opinion or reply or deal with something in the media that is coming up. And so they are always looking for briefings. They are always looking for people with some information who can say, this is what this subject is about. And that is often what is, you know, they're actually looking for, not only from their constituents, but from organisations like Humanists UK do have a 2-page briefing on the Human Rights Act reform, what's going to happen to Section 3, that can be digested and read. Always the best time to send an email to your MP is Thursday evenings or Friday mornings, because that's the day. Fridays are traditionally when they go back to their constituencies to do constituency surgeries. So for the majority of them, Friday morning, they're going to be sitting on a train. And if you want to get into their inbox, they're going to look at their emails. So if you get something that pops into their inbox on Friday morning, they're more likely to read it because they're going to have a 2-hour train journey back to their constituencies. So that's kind of thinking about how you can be influential in that way.
You mentioned surgeries there. I was going to ask a question about that. Do you ever ask local members to go to a surgery? And is that an idea that you could do on a particular campaigning issue?
Yes, so we are doing this with 2 of our campaigns at the moment. So I was working with our wedding celebrants. So I've been emailing our wedding celebrants for quite some time and helping them to getting to agree to go see their MPs and giving them one-to-one training on what they need to do. So through that, since Christmas, we've had a constituent go to see Dominic Raab, who is the Secretary of State for Justice, so ultimately marriage law falls with him. And we've also had a member go see Boris Johnson. And so I've been particularly prioritising with the Pacific group of our members. So our wedding celebrants would be the most involved in our humanist marriage campaign. And within that, we've been working on cabinet members. So really prioritising how impactful we can be. And we've just started recently doing a similar thing with members and supporters who we think should be very animated with assisted dying. Because with assisted dying, what really is going to make the difference is if the vote goes forward on an assisting dying bill, it will always be a free vote. It'll be a matter of conscience, so the parties won't whip their MPs to vote either way. So what you need to do is to convince your MP on a matter of conscience that assisted dying is a good thing. And what's going to convince them of that is the personal stories of their constituents and the powerful testimonies that people have in such an emotive issue. So if you are interested in that, in either of those two, please do get in contact with me. We do have briefings, we give you a little pack of everything you need to know, the FAQs, what to respond to questions that they're likely to give you, what's the, how to deal with people pushing back. And also we have briefings that you can print out and give to your MP at the meeting to be like, this is, this is what you need to know. So we do that. And we've been working with a very select group set of members at the moment, but there's no reason why, if anyone's particularly motivated by an issue, that we can't, if they get in touch with us, we can't set up a Zoom call to do some training.
Rachel, if we write to our MPs and we get a significant reply, are you interested in receiving a copy of it?
Yes, please do. So if you, I spent lots of this morning making spreadsheets of replies that I've got back from our members and supporters who've written to their MPs. It really does inform our understanding of where the government sits on any position, and also the numbers. So with the Northern Ireland campaign, I know now that if we had a bill on the floor, we have a majority. And that's really through people sending us those replies. And it's also, we ask for meetings. So the MP for Anglesey, or it's got, the actual constituency is called Yves Mons in Welsh, but it's a constituency called Anglesey. A member wrote to her saying, we want you to put a question in Parliament about pastoral carers and the armed forces, and she did. Being a good constituency MP, we kind of jumped on that and had a meeting with her and said, you're a new MP, we saw that you put this meeting, you had put this question down, as this is not, an area that we're interested in. We discovered that she was sort of a humanist tending person, and that's someone that we then brought into the humanist group, and that all came from someone writing to their MP. Previously she wasn't on our radar. So yeah, I have a whole inbox just for receiving replies.
I'm sure my MP is on your radar.
Where do you live?
Worthing West. It's
Okay, so
Peter Bottomley.
Oh, Peter Bottomley.
Yeah.
Yes. Technically not a humanist himself. He's a Christian, but he is very humanist leaning, and he's done a lot of work in the past. It's very fun, Peter Bottomley.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Do we have any other comments or observations or questions?
Just one very small point. One of your main campaigns is to increase the percentage of people that are opposed to RE discrimination in schools. No, RE discrimination in schools. I thought that was very high already. So do you know what the percentage is at the moment? Because I'd have thought that was, or maybe I'm getting confused with other statistics, like the number of people that are, percentage of people that are opposed to faith schools or other aspects of RE and faith schools.
On the faith schools, I don't know the percentages on that, mostly because education is the one area I don't work on in our team. We have two members who are our education specialists, but it's one of our key areas is moving people who are think at a very basic level, it's moving people who see faith schools as something benign to seeing that they are problematic. And there are a lot of people in the UK who have never really either haven't gone through the system where they've tried to get their children into these schools, have sent their children or personally been to a religious primary school and seen it as a rather benign experience and didn't see the wider impact that religious selection has, or simply have never thought about it, and have just always assumed that there is a reason that we have legalized discrimination in this area. So there are, I think, awareness of the issue of faith schools is something that we do wish to work on and is a priority area. And to do with that, again, is opposing the number of schools that do use religious selection. Unfortunately, however, that is not my area of expertise because I'm not the education campaigns manager, so I couldn't give you a figure for what that currently stands at or how we measure that. We do obviously do polling on a lot of areas. I'm currently working on a report that's looking at how public opinion has changed on the issue of assisted dying. And assisted dying, we're consistently now seeing 80% of the general public in favour of either for terminally ill or for incurably suffering individuals. There's a slight difference between the two different approaches. Which is interesting because it's probably the area where there's the biggest divide between public opinion support and support in Parliament. So there's not a correlation between the huge amount of people in the public who support assisted dying and the very few number of MPs that are publicly advocating for assisted dying. So that's quite an interesting area of our work.
So regarding MPs then, they're supposed to represent, or are they supposed to represent their local constituents? Because my MP, a Conservative MP, he obviously doesn't represent the constituents on a number of issues where there's a clear majority in opposition to Conservative policy.
Well, that's a question, a constitutional question, and I think people have written sort of politics textbooks about what the exact role of an MP is, whether they are a delegate model where they represent the views of they're delegated by the views of their constituents, or whether they're a representative that's there to further an agenda which takes in the views of their constituencies but can differ using their own interpretation. And I think most MPs certainly go with the representative rather than the delegate model.
No.
I think that's certainly how MPs that I have worked with, they don't see their role as to exactly mirror what their constituents believe on a particular issue. And obviously some issues, such as things that we work on, assisted dying and abortion, are always going to be matters of conscience votes. But also they are responsible to their parties more than any other constituent group. They are in position because of their party affiliation, so how they are whipped and their position in their party is of course an important factor in how they decide on anything.
What's your most frustrating part of your job?
In terms of campaign areas, one of the most frustrating is quite surprising. But working on chaplaincies in NHS and the prison service, one of the most resistant areas where I actually experience prejudice on the part of people who are opposing me is when working with chaplains. And I think part of that is we're talking about paid positions in hospitals, and so there's only so many paid positions, and so they see it as a zero-sum game. So if humanists are getting position, that means a member of the Church of England isn't. And they've also had a stranglehold on prison chaplaincy, on NHS chaplaincy for decades. And but I actually find some of the most obstructive opposition that we have, and its low-level obstructiveness, is in getting very lovely people who want to go and talk to people in hospitals to be allowed to do that. And that can be very frustrating. So the progress has been consistent but slow, I think, in terms of gaining positions in hospitals and for non-religious people. And I think, yeah, it's been sometimes one of the more difficult groups to work with. Much so than those who oppose assisted dying, or sometimes even those who oppose abortion. Actually, chaplains can be prickly.
Do you get upset sometimes when the way things are going, or is it just your role to keep on plugging away and doing your job? And
I think sometimes I think at the current there's things in the current government, particularly around what it's doing with immigration and asylum and the Human Rights Act, which I believe is very morally wrong. But it's not something that would upset me. It's just something I'm motivated to campaign on. With the Borders and Immigration Bill passed its last stage in Parliament this week. When that comes into force, it will raise the evidential bar for non-religious asylum claimants quite significantly higher. And this is going to make it more difficult, and it is already incredibly difficult, for non-religious people to be able to demonstrate their beliefs and demonstrate persecution that they experience in their home countries. So it's very difficult across the board, actually. Religion is one of the hardest of the 5 grounds in which you can claim asylum. And within that, the non-religious are at a particularly disadvantage compared to other groups, which have more established support networks and also very much clearer doctrinal ways in which they demonstrate their beliefs, which is very different from the non-religious, which are kind of often seen as very much an invisible minority in many countries. And I think the way in which the government is demonising asylum seekers and immigration in general is appalling, and it's actually something which I think is generally very unfair. And I think it's the unfairness of the way that asylum is being treated in this country that I think we should, in collaboration with a lot of other organisations, should be doing more to prevent. And it's frustrating that when you're making, which are very valid cases, many backbench MPs, particularly on the Conservative side, are not willing to be persuaded by the evidence because it's an ideological approach.
I think that would frustrate me tremendously, that you have the evidence, and so many of all of our campaigns, really, the evidence is all on our side. You have the evidence there, and you can argue it, and yet it's like banging your head against a brick wall.
Yes, and sometimes I think success in campaigns may be measured over decades. But then things do happen. I mean, we campaigned for the abolition of blasphemy laws in England and Wales really since our foundation in the 19th century. That was in the campaign area, but we achieved it in 2009, and we are set to achieve it in Northern Ireland, which will be the final piece of the puzzle in terms of blasphemy laws in the UK. So it's not despairing. We are progressing forward, and I think once the census results come out, which will be later this year, we anticipate that there will be quite a significant growth in the number of non-religious people in the UK and those that should be in the system.
Yeah, we recently had a talk by I've forgotten his name now. He gave a talk on the changing role of belief in the changing belief landscape. It's frustrating, I can't remember his name, and it was a very striking talk, showing the graph with the declining C of E and the increase in non-religious. And in fact, I put that in an email to all schools because it's so striking that when teachers see that, they realise that I'm getting a bit of feedback here. That they realise. They can only realise that things are changing, and it's striking statistics like that, I think that will eventually, hopefully, persuade people to change.
Yeah, I've got a question that builds on that from Jonathan, which is how many atheists are there in the UK? So this is a very interesting question. It's a good question. So the British Social Attitude Survey is what we usually use and is the most accurate, in our opinion, measure of belief in the UK. And it's conducted every year, and consistently, for most of the last decade, those who will claim they are non-religious, they do not have religious beliefs, will be about 52% of the population. Now, that is something that's consistently shown, so slightly more than half of the people in the country identify as non-religious. Now, the census is the official government way of measuring the population's beliefs, and it's conducted once every 10 years. Now, the census is hugely problematic because it has a question which simply says, what is your religion? Which, as you can tell already, is a leading question. And it is designed to be leading because it's not actually a measure of religious belief. It's trying to measure very loosely cultural affiliation to religion, because it believes that that might be useful to its service users, that people who are non-practicing Jews or secular Sikhs still say that they have some sort of cultural affiliation to their religion. And so they're encouraging Jews and Sikhs to continue to say that they're Jewish and they are Sikh and tick those boxes. The upshot of that is it massively overestimates the number of Christians in the country, because you get a lot of what we call census Christians, people who in no way have exhibited Christian beliefs. They don't practice Christianity, they don't believe in the tenets of Christ, but they have a loose cultural affiliation. They may have been baptized, they might have gone to a C of E primary school, they kind of see themselves as, well, we call them sort of census Christians. They wouldn't otherwise have ticked that they're Christian. But the effect of that is it literally cuts the number of people who identify as non-religious in half. So at the last census, about 25, that's 2011, about 25% of people tick the no religion box. And the no religion box is actually at the top of the list. And that was a huge increase from 2001. We did some polling with YouGov before the current census on using various different types of question, but even using the census's leading question, we got a result back from YouGov that 47% of people were going to tick the no religion box. Now, I think it won't actually be quite as much as that, because I think the sample they used, I think there probably weren't as many Muslims in the sample as there should have been. So I think our poll might have underestimated the number of Muslims. But I think we're looking at a significant increase from 25% possibly up to 40% when we get the data later this year. So normally, and if you're looking specifically at belief, you're not looking at practice and you're not looking at cultural affiliation, you're looking at roughly around 50% of people being non-religious. You're then looking around this group being Christians bundled together, with the second largest group being Muslims at around 6 and 7%, and then all the rest of the minority religious beliefs from 6% downwards. I've got a question here saying, thank you for that answer. Is it true that there are 155 million atheists in Europe? That I don't know where that statistic comes from. I've never seen that before. Certainly, Europe as a whole has seen a moving away from religious belief in the last few decades. That's particularly true in the Scandinavian countries, where consistently they're seeing more than 50% of the population being non-religious. What I also think will be very interesting, Ireland is conducting a census very soon, and Ireland is a very strongly and traditionally a very strongly Catholic country. What we've seen in recent referendums on abortion, on gay marriage, on the blasphemy law, is there is a huge push against the sort of very rotten roots of theocracy in Ireland. So it would be interesting to see whether that translates in the census to an increase in the non-religious population. So I believe at the last Irish census, about 10% of people said that they were non-religious. So you're looking at 90% Christian, really, with very small numbers of any non-Christian minorities. But I think we are seeing consistently a very strong push against the Catholic Church's influence in Ireland. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, later next year when those results come out, how Ireland is changing. But also you see a kind of counter to that in many countries. We're seeing a resurgence of conservative Catholicism in Poland and in many of the Eastern European countries. So I don't know where that statistic of 155 million comes from. I believe the population of the EU is roughly 400 million, but yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
That's very encouraging. Yeah, and so do you know when the statistics do come out for the census?
So the first release is going to be population density, and that's coming on the 28th of June. And then I believe the religion and belief questions, which will also come out as a package with several other questions, notably about ethnic origins and nationality, and a few other questions about sort of social beliefs. Should be, I believe, in late summer, early autumn. So they haven't got a date yet, but it's saying around about September, I would imagine. And it should be very interesting. We did a very strong campaign last year on getting more people to tick the no religion box, and our aim was to kind of dominate the social media spaces, be the leading kind of issue with the census is the religion question, because there's lots of different groups who have lots of different issues with the census, and they're all campaigning for various things. So there's a campaign that people wanted, Sikhs and Jews wanted to have Sikhism and Judaism in the ethnicity question as well as the religion question. And there was a court case that was taken, and ultimately the census won that, and so they didn't have those as ethnic identities. There's campaigns by different Hindu groups to have Hinduism broken down into different beliefs. I believe that one box doesn't really cover the vast variety of different types of Hinduism, which is true. But there was also campaigns there's always a campaign for people to say that they're Jedi, and there was a campaign by Extinction Rebellion and various climate groups that wanted people to put climate concerned as their religion in the other box, which is a very bad idea for several reasons. But then we were trying to get our issue to be louder than all of those various other issues that were coming, and we were successful. We got something around, I believe, 8 million impressions across our social media platforms, and we certainly were dominating the spaces. So that was kind of a success in terms of what we were aiming to achieve. And we hope this translates. Interestingly, between 2001 and 2011, the Jedi population of the UK decimated. I think people thought the joke was old, but they had one of the quickest declines of any group.
How fickle religion is. Yeah, I remember leafleting our entire area. I just didn't realise how many houses were in our area, and about the campaign, the census campaign. And well, you don't know particularly the effect of anything you do, but I think you just have to believe that every small step counts.
Yeah, it was. There's lots of nuances, because this was the first time, because it's a household survey, for example. How do you ensure that children who might want to identify as apostates, as atheists, be able to do so in a household where, in a particularly religious household, where that might not be acceptable? And because it was an online census, there were ways of doing that, so we had to be, promoting that to various ways. I mean, it was also the first time that census had a question about sexuality, and we worked with Stonewall to say, well, could those under 16 who want to identify as a certain sexuality, which might but also want that to be confidential in a household survey where it's done per household, how can that be achieved? So there's lots of nuances and kinks to the campaign there. Yeah.
I think as a member of SACRE and well, a recent member, and I was opposed for I think 12 years. One of the objections was that they used the national census rather than the British Social Attitudes survey. And of course they would say, well, that's very convenient to you, isn't it, that you're using some statistics that favour your cause. But I'm looking forward to this census results in September, because maybe that's at least the direction of travel suggests that things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, the census question, as I say, is not about belief, and it is deliberately measuring a very loose cultural affiliation. Very few people, I think, are aware of that or use the data correctly, and SACREs are one of the most guilty about misusing census data. I am a member of a SACRE. I was denied full membership and I took a legal challenge, and the local authority backed down and changed its mind, and I was able to sit on SACRE as a full member. It had attempted to use census data as part of that justification, but ultimately it's a poor argument, really, when you're looking at, even under the census, you know, you're talking about 25% of people identifying as non-religious. And the misuse of the data to say, well, very few people say that they're humanist. Well, we encourage people actively not to say that they're humanist, because humanist is not a religion, and it's a misuse of that data. So I think in areas where that's used, we should be campaigning and we should be pointing out and challenging misuse of that. SACREs do this all the time, and it's an area where we need to challenge the misuse of statistics and data.
Yeah. Well, it's coming up to 8:30. Thank you very much, Rachel. It's fascinating. Your job must be so interesting. Goodness, you must be working all hours as well. But I think it must be a very rewarding and interesting job that you've got, and I think it's a great talk, because most people don't know what goes on. I found the parts about how you influence parliamentarians and so on, and how you work with them collaboratively. That's really insightful, and I hope a lot of people will watch this talk, and I'll certainly be promoting it.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I hope it's been enjoyable and insightful. And have a very good rest of your evening.
Thanks very much.